Welcome to Season 1, Episode 19 of Digital Dissection, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties. Today, we're capping off Firefly Week with our friend Shawn of Cheap Seat Reviews. Shawn is a super fan of the 2005 film that sought to breathe new life back into a verse that was tragically cut short.
But before we notice how the primary buffer panel just flew off our ship, or how to fly like a leaf on the wind, we are Joe and Mark, two dudes who have loved talking about the Firefly verse and are sad to see a great week discussing it with friends come to an end. After you listen to the show today, please visit our friends at Cheap Seat Reviews. They're a great show with over 340 episodes under their belts. They cover everything in film. Find them on Libsyn. If you got here by accident, though, and don't know much about this show, try searching for us on all major platforms by typing in Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast. If you're not following podcast websites, that's okay. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter by searching at Digital Dissect 1. Our social media sites share more pop culture news and current information, so feel free to join the conversation.
Well, welcome to everyone to the third and final episode of our Firefly / Serenity Week. And because, we've had it going the whole time, we're not going to stop now. We have yet another podcaster joining us today. So coming here from, it is the Cheap Seat Review podcast. Introduce yourself. Tell us more about your podcast and, I would say how we found you. That's more of a Mark thing. He peruses the internet for folks and promotion. So yeah, tell us more about yourself. Tell us more about your podcast.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. This is very exciting. And so my name is Shawn Allred. I am the host of Cheap Seat Reviews, the podcast that explores the Hollywood film industry for the greater good. We're a film review podcast. We've been doing this for, we recorded episode 347 last night. And
ooh, nice.
Ooh, wow.
And, so we've been doing it a while. It's a lot of fun. The whole Pottern family on Twitter has been great. I only really figured out how to use Twitter about 6 months ago, and nice. and discovered that there's actually a way you can communicate with other podcasters and be able to collaborate with other shows, which is a lot of fun. Regardless of download increase or not, which is not the point. The point is that we get to have these fun discussions. And when you guys approached me and said, "Hey, we're going to do this Firefly kind of trilogy, so to speak, with the show and then the kind of the music component and then the movie itself. You want to do the movie?" I'm like, I could not have replied yes fast enough on Twitter. So this is very exciting to me.
Well, when I told you, Shawn, that do you want to work together to get a 3-block radius pregnant with just our dulcet tones, you said yes, let's do that. And you can't see it, but he's like going, "Yeah, Mark, why are you saying this to me? Don't say this to me." But hey, we are so happy that you're here because you came highly recommended from some of our friends in that Pottern family that you mentioned. So Jesse from the Sudden But Inevitable Rewatch podcast, who's actually joining us for our first episode of this week. When I was starting to ask folks about who are our biggest Serenity fans that we know on Twitter, and your name came up right away. I mean, there's almost no hesitation whatsoever. So yeah, once I started digging through some past tweets, I saw you just hyping it up, and I said, we found the right guy. Let's get him on.
Well, and I was on Jesse's show. I was on the Sudden But Inevitable. I helped them review the Ariel episode, and unlike if you've listened to their show, either you two or the listeners of this podcast have also listened to that show. They had 2 of the 4 that were experiencing Firefly for the first time, and I experienced it differently than what Josh and Kylie experienced it, in that I watched the movie first. So my first experience with Firefly was Serenity. I had never even heard of Firefly. I was like so many millions of Americans that didn't know that this neat show even existed. And I was right out of college, And when my roommate said, "Hey, this new movie just came out on DVD. Do you want to watch it?" And I said, "Sure. What's it called?" He's called Serenity. I'm like, "All right. Well, what's it about?" Space cowboys. Sold. And we watched it. And I got done, and I was so blown away that he left to go do other life things that you do, and I rewatched it right then. I literally ordered pizza and then watched it again. And I have probably since watched it over 20 plus times. And I've done the thing where you watch it with the director's commentary and all this stuff. And I'm proud to admit this is my favorite film of all time.
Oh, that's awesome.
This is it. This is my favorite film. I'm a Trekkie. I love Star Trek, but and usually when people say, "What's your favorite movie?" I just say Star Trek because they've never heard of Serenity. So it's just easier to say Star Trek. Because because I know you know who you're talking to, right? Like if oh, what's your favorite movie? I just say Star Trek. Then if they don't ask which one, then I know I'm good. Just say Star Trek because they don't know that there's 13 of them, right? So I just Star Trek. Oh, okay. You like Star Wars? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's your plot armor, right? I mean, that's kind of what I used to use growing up. Was I would basically show people the veneer that they wanted to see, but the folks that actually wanted to dig a little deeper, those are the ones that I wanted to spend my time with. And so in seeing some of your background and looking at the show a little bit, I saw through that veneer right away and said, yes, we need to talk to Shawn. What I'm always interested in, and Joe as well, when we talk to other podcasts, is to understand, how did Cheap Seat Reviews get started, and what's your Marvel / DC origin story here?
It's as simple as I think a lot of other podcasts. Obviously not recently. I think a lot of podcasts recently have started because they were bored and the pandemic kind of gave them an opportunity to do it. Ours was, we had a tradition on Black Friday for about 8 years. There were 4 of us on the podcast, myself, Sam, Chad, and Andrew, or Cornelius, excuse me. And Sam and Chad married their wives or sisters. And so they would go do Black Friday shopping, in which we wanted zero part of. And we all lived near-ish each other. And so we would take that day, that opportunity to go watch a movie that we wanted to see. And then we would go eat a meal afterwards and then just talk about it as literally what we're about to do, just with less structure. And then finally
less food, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah, less food. Yeah, we usually went to the local Red Robin because we like burgers and things. So we did that for years. And then when podcasting kind of has its first push in kind of the 2012 area, 2013, 2014, Sam, co-host, said, we ought to just record this and just see if people will listen. And so I spent the next 3 or 4 months researching what it would take, because at the time when you Googled how to start a podcast, you only got like 3 results. Now you would just listen to a podcast on how to start a podcast. That wasn't an option then. And we just piecemealed it, and the system that I use now to even do the show is very different than most people, but whatever. And I'm an audio guy by trade, so of course I'm going to use things a little different than most others. But yeah, we just Sam picked the name, told me to be the host, and we recorded. I don't know if you guys did this, so we recorded like 5 episodes before we felt comfortable releasing one. So there actually exists on a hard drive that will never be heard by anyone, our review of Serenity. We did the movie.
Oh my.
But our audio quality was so bad, I did not feel comfortable releasing it. And so finally, when it felt good enough to release, we Beverly Hills Cop was our first episode.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. And that was 7 years ago.
We oddly did the same thing with recording 5 episodes. So we figured if we're going to launch a channel, let's have enough content for people to chew on for a little bit while we're working on the other stuff. So, but we actually released those first 5. Joe and I probably both took a few years off of our life taking that leap of faith. So, but yeah, the quality got pretty good, with the technology. We didn't even have to do a whole lot with the mics that we purchased. I mean, it filtered sounds out. And so, here we are.
Everything but cats and corgis. It keeps everything else out.
Sure. Yeah. And again, in the heyday of it, or the heyday is the wrong word, in the early days of it, it was making up as you go along. And it's really interesting to me specifically when I go back and maybe not listen, but kind of go back and think what those shows were, those original shows, compared to what our show sounds like now. Not just in terms of quality, but content, the way that we review the show. I was probably episode 10 before I came up with the catchphrase that I introed tonight with. I hadn't even come up with that yet. We were just making it up as we go. And so now we have, segments that we do at every episode, and we've just developed them along the way, and it just evolves, which is great. And I always encourage people to allow their show to evolve. Find if there's something new that you want to try that you think will work, just try it. And then if you get feedback, they said, I don't like that, then stop or whatever. So.
Yeah, which is good. We'll find around eventually, but until then, I'll just keep hitting Mark with the Judge Dredd catchphrase to throw him off guard.
Yeah, if you listen to our analysis of the 1995 Judge Dredd movie, which premieres about a month before this episode, he managed to stick me with that one-liner from Judge Dredd about 4 times before I finally just ripped the headset off and went, "Yep, we're good for the night. Let's stop recording. We're moving on." but hey, speaking of moving on, we are here today to talk about a verse that was given a second chance. So we've moved on from the trauma of Fox canceling yet another TV show that they just mismanaged to hell. And now we're kind of looking at what's going on with the Firefly property after it leaves Fox. And ultimately at that point, Joss Whedon's kind of shopping around the idea. Universal picks up the rights to Firefly, gets it away from Fox. So he starts talking behind the scenes. And at this point in time, it's right around the early 2000s, right? The show had just been taken off the air. And if you guys remember, back in 2002, 2003, we weren't really playing around on Facebook, were we? I mean,
no. Facebook was yet. Yeah, it was. If it was around, it was very limited. This was back when you had to have an actual university email address to even use Facebook, and even then, not every university was able to join. So, yeah, we were physically hanging out with people and doing things.
And updating your MySpace page. And
of course,
that you had the
right 8 spaces.
You had your top 8 plus that music that you had to make sure was blaring when you hit their page. You're gonna, for me in 2004, you're gonna get hit with some Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or Real Big Fish.
Oh yeah,
yes,
and it's perfect because you got that when every once in a while when you're taking a break from your LAN party with your friends when you're gaming.
Oh yeah. Playing Unreal Tournament. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Unreal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Halo 2, I believe at the time.
Yeah, Halo 2 was also a big one.
It was a different landscape, but guess what? The fans of Firefly, were basically asked by the producers of the show, Joss Whedon and the crew surrounding him, to get the word out. If you guys really love Firefly, we want to hear those thoughts after the cancellation. So back then, like you mentioned, we were still meeting physically and talking to people. So what did they do? They actually went to message boards, those good old-fashioned message boards I used to hang out on quite a bit, and just generating enthusiasm left and right, because the Firefly community wasn't that large, but the people it was comprised of were some of the most motivated and passionate fans you're ever going to find. So part of this enthusiasm going to Universal, trying to make a case with Joss Whedon, was the fact that the DVD sales were absolutely stellar for the stock that was available when the show was officially pressed on DVD. And at that point in time, Amazon, who was still known for selling books and not a whole lot else, they burned through their 200,000 unit inventory of pre-order space in minutes. I mean, people just bought the hell out of this TV show. So it's interesting to think that a combination of DVD sales and then fan outrage, which I'm fine with calling this the original Snyder Cut, hashtag Snyder Cut movement. was the 2002 edition of fans pushing Firefly as far as they could at that point. Because think about it. I mean, a lot of folks attribute this as like the original, like fan Snyder Cut, I guess call to action, if you will. So different technology, different era entirely. But yeah, that's a big reason why we've even got this conversation.
And I'm glad they did, because I don't know if I've actually said this in any of this week's episodes yet, but I was in the same boat Shawn was, and I had never seen Firefly before I'd saw Serenity, and it was literally me hanging out with some new friends I just made at college, and they're like, "Dude, guys, Serenity's coming out soon. This is gonna be so great!" And all of them were excited to see it. I'm like, "What the heck is Serenity, guys? Like, I don't know what this is." And they're like, "How do you not know what it is? Like, one dude with a Star Trek poster in his bedroom, you don't know what Serenity." And so they take me to the movie, and I'm like, "This is fun," except for the one cool guy got shot with a harpoon. That sucked. I really liked him. And then you go back and watch the series, and it's like, wow, I think like if I am one person on the show, I'm Wash, and thanks. That's great. But yeah, no, I did the same thing. Like, I retroactively fell in love with the series because I saw the movie first. So I am really glad that the DVD sales just skyrocketed, and this got a second win because of it.
Well, I was one of those weird people that saw a couple episodes of the TV show, but then I saw Serenity on like the HBO and pay channels. And so, Shawn, you and I talked about this, before we hit that record button, that you've seen this movie many times, and the fact that you also mentioned to us that you watched it for the first time and then immediately watched it again. That was the same thing for me watching it on like HBO, was that I watched it for the first time, not knowing a whole lot about the main series. And then as soon as the first run ended, HBO goes, "And we're playing an encore of Serenity." And I'm like, I have literally nothing else to do other than to get, drunk and eat pizza. So I'm just going to sit right here and I'm going to keep watching it. And yeah, I fell in love with the movie almost the exact same way. So yeah, part of the interest for me though with this movie was the fact that, it obviously still has the flair and the look of not quite the TV show, but the CGI, you can tell, I wouldn't say needed a little bit of help, but when I thought about that and started to read into this a little bit, part of the way they helped keep the costs down for this film was that they actually filmed it in California, and they only needed a $40 million budget to do it. And looking back at it, I think it's a feat that they got their money's worth out of that.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I have. So whenever you have a product like this or something that you love, right, you want to share it with other people. And I have personally shared, I used to work at a university, and I had students that worked for me. And so I would say, "Hey, you like space movies and shows and stuff like that?" And they're like, "Yeah." So on our lunch breaks, we would watch Firefly together. During, and I did that probably to 7 or 8 of my student employees that got to watch the show, and I got to introduce the show. And I did the same thing with the movie, Serenity, obviously before I knew about Firefly. And at the time that the movie came out in 2005, I was actually working in the business. I was in TV and film. And so I'm showing this movie to my other film buddies, my the camera operators and the other, and I'm like, "Guys, I got to show you this movie. What do you think?" And then they watch it, and of course they're watching it from a different point of view than I am. And the camera guy goes, "Man, that opening kind of sequence when they're showing the ship, that was a really great one take. Well, there's one cut, but otherwise it was really great." And I said, "Yeah, but that cut's so small you can't see it very well." And he goes, "No, it was really great." And then you show it to the costume guy, and he's like, "Oh, that was really..." So it was really neat experience, like to showing it to other people. And I do remember them. They're like, "The CGI is not really great." And I'm like, $40 million, and but again, they're also comparing it to. I'm trying to think, because I was doing the movie, or the TV show I was doing in Charleston was in 06. So I think it was like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had just come out. I mean, that's like that's like $100 million Danny Elfman thing, right? Danny Elfman, Tim Burton thing.
Yep.
Like it's a little unfair, to compare.
Yeah.
And then Revenge of the Sith came out, I mean, just before Serenity did too. So you've got a big budget sandwich on both sides of this movie coming out. And
I think the Batman Begins came out this year too.
Yeah.
I think it did. Yeah.
And wasn't one of the Fantastic Four movies this year also?
Yeah, but I don't know if that really Fantastic Four.
I mean, the movie's bad, but it doesn't look
visually.
bad.
Yeah, visually that's fine. You're right.
Yeah.
And a heck of a trailer for that movie. I remember I'm not even a Fantastic Four fan at all. Growing up, I thought they were one of the lamer superhero teams out there. But was that trailer for that first movie pretty hype? It had I think a Perfect Circle song. I think it was Counting Bodies Like Sheep or something.
Interesting.
And it just really, really rocked. And you saw the Thing stop a semi truck by just putting his shoulder into it, and it looked really cool. Yeah. And then you got what you got there. But anyway, hey, Serenity, a more fun movie. Way more of a fun movie, even though not visually as striking as that one.
If I can hijack the show for 10 seconds, I want to stay here for just a minute. If it's okay. If you want to edit this out, feel free to. There are only 2 film trailers that have impacted me. Just the fact that you remembered that is interesting, because I don't remember that trailer. But the 2 that I remember very vividly, is the Spider-Man one. There's Tobey Maguire one.
Oh yeah.
The original teaser with the towers. The 2
Yep.
towers.
And the helicopter,
And the helicopter in the web. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, they have made a live action Spider-Man, and this looks amazing.
Yes.
And then of course 9/11 changed the whole everything about everything. And then they had to add, they CGI'd in some American flags at the end of the movie to make it a little more patriotic. But that trailer always affected me. The second trailer that I was literally weeping at was I went to go see Iron Man 2008. I went to go see Iron Man, and in the trailer, the previews for Iron Man, I had missed completely that J.J. Abrams was doing a new Star Trek. And it was the teaser trailer for that Star Trek where it shows these men, they're working
the shipyard.
The shipyard, right? And you don't know what they're doing, and you just hear, I think it's John F. Kennedy is doing a speech or something.
Yeah.
And then you get just the hint of the original theme as the camera pans back and you see the top of the saucer and one of them fell. And I was weeping, and my wife is looking at me going, "Really?" I said, "What?" She says, "You didn't even cry at our wedding." And I said, "This is new Star Trek."
But this is the Enterprise.
Oh, honey, my eyes are just sweaty. Okay, they're just sweaty. I'm not crying. But you know what though? Hey, Shawn, you actually bring up a really good point about eliciting the responses of the audience here. When it came to Firefly and Serenity, that is something that the Fox team screwed up. And that is something that Universal also didn't really do a good job of here. And it comes across in both the ratings for the TV show, which oddly enough, the TV show had ratings that were almost twice as big as Game of Thrones first episodes were. Just to give you a hint of how TV ratings are kind of, wonky. But still, that's with this property, it's been a consistent problem. They just can't seem to get the right audience in the seats watching this thing. So that showed up in the box office in 2005, and unfortunate lesson for some of the most passionate people of this show to have to learn is that you put a lot of good effort into this, you've made some good content, but they just can't get people to see it. So yeah, I mean, like you kind of mentioned this, it's almost like an inner circle, right? Firefly and Serenity have felt like this inside thing, there's an inner circle of people that love these properties. And that's the same way that I found out about the show. Was my brother sat me down and said, "Hey, check out this show. I think you're going to like it." And so unfortunately, that's not how you make big budget numbers and sequels, Yeah.
But hey,
you know what? Yeah.
Word of mouth doesn't always work when you're, word of mouth works all right when it's either a super low budget and there's not an expectation You know what I'm saying? Like, what's a good example of that?
The Room.
Well, yeah, but that's so bad it's good kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking like what's that new Nicolas Cage? It's not new, but like
Oh.
that Mandy, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I've not
Yeah.
seen it, but everyone says it's actually like one of the best horror flicks ever. And you know, it's like an $11 budget because it's Nicolas Cage, but like it has like a grassroots kind of thing, or you know, I'd never want to give credit to Birdemic, but maybe it's a little bit like that too.
Well, these movies do exist. I mean, the one that I'm
Mhm.
thinking of is a movie called Blood Creek that came out that had Michael Fassbender, Dominic Purcell, and I knew I was going to do this. I always forget like one name. I think it's just part of the aging process here, but it was Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill was part of this movie called Blood Creek. Okay, low budget horror film. It was actually a really well done one, and nobody's seen it. And I've been kicking it around. It came out in 2009 too, but yeah, these movies exist. I mean, these actors got to make insurance somehow, so they're making movies all the time. You just don't always see them. So yeah, it's one of those cases of the same type of thing here. But you know what? We've talked a little bit about the background of the movie, and for those of you who've stuck with us this long, we are going to talk about Serenity. So why don't we just crack that one open? You know, you mentioned the opening to this movie, and we talk a little bit about this in our episode with measuring the score, that they did try to call back to the TV show a little bit. And what you mentioned with seeing the Serenity, you know, logo with that solo violin playing, when I first watched the movie, it didn't hit me as much because I hadn't seen the show yet. But as soon as I saw the TV show, recognized the music, and saw the importance of that Serenity logo and the music playing, to quote you about being brought to tears, my eyes are a little misty getting to see that logo and getting to see a little bit more money behind it. But yeah. So I thought what was really cool about this, though, is that, you know, this was a property that they thought would never get revived. I mean, as passionate as the actors were. And so the actual, you know, ship, the Firefly ship, they had actually torn down that entire thing, and they had to rebuild it. I mean, the entire thing from memory. So I thought it was really cool that when we do get back into this, you know, the writers of the movie had a pretty tall order to introduce you to all of these characters and the ship. The ship's a character on its own, and we have to get through this fairly quickly. What are your thoughts on the introduction process and how they handled that here?
Yeah, so there's two things. For those who've watched the movie, know that when we use the word opening, we're not talking about the prison or the hospital escape. I don't think of that as the opening. I think of that as the preface. That is
Yes.
If you were reading a book, it would be the preface before chapter 1, because that's the only part that's before the TV show, right? They didn't get a chance to film in the TV show for various reasons. How Simon broke her out. Here's that story. So, so again, when we're saying first scene, I am talking about the I'm going to use air quotes for one cut. There is a cut, but the one take shot. And I love the scene for introducing the characters. From the point of view of having never seen the Firefly show, I immediately know that guy's the pilot. He calls him Wash, so I know his name is Wash. I don't know his full name. I just know his name is Wash. Then he literally grabs the thing and says, "This is the captain." Okay, we know you're the captain. He walks down the stairs. We see Jane. Jane, how many guns you gonna bring? You only got the 2 arms. Well, I get excited with the choices. I'll have my options. So now we know that he's not only is he like the heavy weapons muscle because he physically is bigger, and Adam Baldwin gained muscle for this role. I mean, he looks significantly larger. Which seems difficult to do, but he looks beefier in this. So now we know he's the heavy weapons guy. We walk down the aisle a little bit more, and then Zoe comes out, and she says, "We crashing again?" He says, "Talk to your husband." Okay, we've now established that they're a thing. right?
Yeah.
And then we move in. There's Kaylee. She's in the engine room. Obviously, she's the mechanic. My ship don't crash. She crashes. You crashed her. And then he doesn't call him Simon. He calls him Doc. Hey, Doc.
Yes.
I guess we'll need to get inoculated before we go. So now he's the doctor, right? We have now met the entire crew. And, well, River, I guess, is the last one. It's part. And then so they have that conversation about River.
Yep.
And I love it. I love the way that they did it. I love that they did it in a one take. We get to see the ship. We get to walk through the ship. We get to experience it as the ship is coming in for a landing. So things are shaking. And the fact that they were able to have the budget to to build the set on a gimbal a little bit so they can make things shake. Yeah. And it's such a brilliant thing. And if you're wondering where the cut is, it's when Nathan Fillion walks, they go down the stairs towards the med bay, and Nathan swipes the camera. And as the camera is panning back to pick up Simon, that's the cut. And then Simon is back on the screen and goes down. It's brilliant. It's really great. I love it.
And I love that you broke down that scene, like, I mean, pretty much frame for frame, because it's poetic in a way, how quickly they catch us up to speed, right? Because if you haven't seen the TV show and you don't know about some of the, let's just say the timeline here, okay? Like between the end of the TV show and the movie, the estimate is that we're anywhere from a few weeks from the finale, or, you know, maybe a few months to 6 months, okay? So like in that time period, we shouldn't have seen a whole lot of change outside of some things that maybe made sense at the end of the TV show. That's why Inara's not on the ship, right? You know, at the end of the TV series, it's basically like, yeah, I think I'm gonna leave the boat and I'm gonna focus on something else. So she's not there. Okay, even if I didn't watch the TV show, that is not critical. I mean, she's just not there. So that's okay from a storytelling standpoint. And the same thing kind of goes with Shepard Book. You know, he's already kind of planting the seed, if you're a TV show fan, that maybe I picked the wrong boat. He's having some doubts about the decisions he's made along the way. So if you are a fan of the TV show, it's not a disappointing start, at least not in my eyes. I thought they did a fine job with that. And so it's kind of nice that we're saving those plot threads for a little bit later, you know, into the movie.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen the movie, like, you don't have to go out of the way with a ton of backstory on these characters. Just those, again, like Shawn pointed out, those really nice, subtle ways of pointing out exactly what that person does, by either what they're carrying, what Mel says to them, or a title is thrown at them. You just get to know who they are by either subtle actions, a quick good one-liner, or an introduction, and you move on. We don't need flashbacks for every character to figure out more about them as the movie goes on. You get to just really enjoy the main story that the movie's trying to talk to us about.
Yeah, this isn't a Christopher Nolan film, you know, where we get a flashback every 15 to 18 minutes. You know, check your watch the next time, which isn't a bad storytelling, you know, method, but yeah,
but it does get tired when everything does it.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
The other, I guess the last one that I mentioned, I forgot to mention, was the fact that they establish River. He uses the phrase, "She's a reader. She sees into the truth of things." And so if you've not seen the show, you can kind of get a hint. Oh, she's got some gifts. You might not quite know what the extent of that is. You know, then you watch the show, and then you get all the breadcrumbs that the show gives you, that she can legit read minds. Kind of all the way through the series. And so when we get to the opening scene with her, and he refers to as a reader, you realize, okay, they know that now, and they're going to exploit the gift that she has.
Which is a really interesting point that you bring up, because it's not just the continuation of the storytelling that they've done here. I mean, it's actually a pretty responsible choice to present her last, because if you notice, the music changes when she's introduced. You know, the feel is totally different. Like, we're singularly focused on her, And so you really can't run away from it. I mean, it's right there in front of you, so that, let's just say if you're one of those general consumption moviegoers and you need things bluntly pointed out to you, I mean, this is about as bluntly pointed out as you can possibly get. Like, if you miss this point, okay, maybe you just didn't want to watch this movie, right? Like, they did a really good job with making sure you know exactly the context you need to get this going. But yeah, I mean, diving right into the plot of the movie, you know, before I even had seen the TV show, the idea of these reavers, or, you know, space cannibals, however you want to bring them up, the TV show references them. So if you're a fan of the TV show, you're not confused by it. But if you're just a first-time viewer and seeing the reavers, it really kind of shakes the tone of everything you're introduced to. You've got this whole like kind of pseudo family dynamic, you know, you've got this quirkiness, and then all of a sudden you've got this hard turn, like running into a metal wall. And suddenly, you know, we've got these guys who've got skins stitched into their clothing coming after you. So as far as a narrative choice, you know, for starting off this movie with it, you know, Shawn, what feelings came out of you seeing that as like the first plot thread here?
So the one thing that the movie has, when you start off, again, outside of the opening scene, the very first scene, when we establish the crew, it's kind of fun, right? Other than the fact that Simon's kind of pissed at the captain and they're having a little bit of friction. It's a heist, right? It's just a heist movie, and it's kind of simple. And then when Jane comes running down, I mean, we're getting humor throughout this whole moment, right? You know, River points to the guy that's got the gun. Zoe questions her with a look. She gives her a look back like, I know what I'm talking about. You brought me here. Of course, that's the guy, right? Yeah. So then we get the other great line. One of my favorite lines of the movie is when they open the safe, but the safe is like this little cubicle, right? And they got the little camera inside. And Zoe says, "At last, we can retire and give up this life of crime." Yeah. And then they open up the actual safe, right? And then, you know, Malcolm gets to say, "We're going to come down there and empty that vault. I need your authorization password." And then, you know, Jane fires off. Boom. Yeah. And the guy just says, okay. So up until this point, it's just kind of a happy-go-lucky heist. And then all of a sudden, she freaks out and says "reavers," right? And the music changes, the tone changes. The big bad man with a 1,000 guns on his hip is now scared, right? The guy is terrified. So even if you've not seen the show, you know what's about to happen is going to be real bad, because the big guy with the guns is terrified. And so then Mal 100 does a 180. You get them inside the vault, you seal the vault. As long as you got air, you stay here. So now you know instantly that Malcolm Reynolds cares about other people. He cares about folk, right? Yeah. And so now we've got his backstory. Other than the other line where he says, "Browncoats, hey, you fought for the independence." And he says, "We're all just folk now, right?" So we get a little more sprinkling. But when the Reavers attack, it's just this frenetic, kind of insane thing. And they're asking, you know, Jane asks the question that we as the audience are asking: why aren't they blowing us out of the sky? And then River has the most terrifying line in the movie: "They want us alive when they eat us."
Yes.
Because go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you make a really good point about wanting to eat us, because I specifically noticed this a few years later, that the guy in the bar that she points out is actually Glenn Howerton of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, who plays Dennis Reynolds. And you know what? It's a great role for him. It's a quick one. But yeah, like, they shoot him in the heart as they're riding away from the Reaver attack. So to reinforce your point of Malcolm Reynolds does actually care about common folk, he shoots this guy in the heart, but it's because he knows what's going to happen to him. And it's a quick judgment decision that he has to make. If he doesn't do it, that guy is going to have the most terrible end of all ends. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure we reinforce that before we got away from it.
Yeah, unless, you know, he could have dropped the payload.
Wow.
Well,
Well,
Or Jane?
well,
Jane?
or Jane, or Jane.
Maybe Jane.
Yeah, maybe. But no, yeah, and they make reference to the fact it's a piece of mercy, because what the movie the river line, they want us alive when they eat us, is substituting the line from the pilot Serenity, in which Zoe explains to Simon, if they catch us, they'll rape us to death, eat our flesh, and sew our skin into their clothes. And if we're very lucky, they'll do it in that order.
Yes.
And so because we don't have that terrifying, sentence, we needed someone else to say something scary to get us, for us to really get the impact of how dangerous it is. You mentioned the guy that they shoot. So in the director's commentary, Joss Whedon is not shy about that Malcolm is based on Han Solo. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And at this point in our lifetime, the Han shoots first is a thing, right? Because the new movies, episode
Extended editions,
the
Yes.
Lucas cuts have come out, and
The new Rock edition. Yes.
yeah. So now we have the Greedo, and they shoot at the same time, right? Which is dumb. And so Joss says, not only do I want my hero to shoot first, he shoots you even if you're unarmed. And so if you count, he shoots 3 unarmed men in this movie. 2 of which he kills, right? The Alliance guy at the end, that guy is about to get and the operative. He shoots him right in the chest, point blank, So I wanted to point that out, that it's kind of awesome. It kind of is Joss basically giving a middle finger to Star Wars, or basically George Lucas in particular.
Which is okay. They've made billions of dollars. They're not hurting. Why not punch above your class a little bit here, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
But you know what, though? I'm really happy you mentioned the operative here, because this does give us an opportunity to really tie back into some of the threads of the TV show. And we've talked about this unification war in one of our earlier episodes that covers the main series. So you've mentioned the Browncoats and how they fought against the allied planets in the solar system. So the central planets versus the outside planets, to decide, are we going to remain independents, or are we going to come all together? And one of the things that, if you had watched the TV show up to this point, who the Alliance is, and that they have some very secretive operations going on. You mentioned the Academy with River Tam, and that Simon breaks her out at the beginning of this movie. Well, you have to dig kind of deep on this to understand why the operative is even a part of this universe. Because if you remember, in the TV show, we had the blue-gloved men, right? They show up basically trying to apprehend the Tams and bring them back, into Alliance custody. If you remember, they've got that really cool blue pen that basically boils your blood from the inside out.
But is it? This was my argument when I was on the Sudden But Inevitable. That was my argument, was that the little blue pen of death is kind of the dumbest thing in Firefly, because and here's the thing, and people make fun of me all the time. I like rules. I like things that make sense. I like things that follow a basic sense of logic. This thing did not have a front or a back. It was just a thing you held in your hand. Did it matter which way he held it? Why did it affect them? If he puts it in his pocket and then he puts in some change from going to McDonald's, does the quarter flip out and now his leg melts? These are the questions I need to know. And
fortunately, I am prepared to answer your question, Shawn.
Oh my gosh!
Now I am not like a Firefly professor or a verse professor, but I do know about some of the threads from the comic book. And that's why I'm happy we went down this path, because the blue glove men, or however you want to call it, the men who wear blue gloves,
sure,
they're actually not real men. You find out in the comic books that they actually are somewhat robotic in nature. And I don't just mean in like the literal sense, but I guess I kind of do. But when you look at it in the comics, they actually have like screws on their body. So they are, a non-synthetic entity. And they always show up in pairs because these two share a consciousness or a mind together. They work in tandem. So that blue pen doesn't affect them because, well, they
Well, they're
don't bleed.
unpokable. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why one of the reasons why they're retired, though, in the comic books, they actually show that one of the folks from the academy that River actually knew, his name is Silas. He actually like beats the hell out of another pair of these two. So there's a female pair and a male pair. So after they find out how quickly dispatched these people who wear blue gloves are, the Alliance decides we need to go with something else to acquire the TAMs. And that's why we get the Operative. The Operative is proven to be a more reliable person to rein them in. So for those of you that hoped I would have had a spoiler alert there, I apologize. but that's the explanation.
But at the same time, like I really liked the Operative as opposed to the blue gloved men, because the Operative seemed like he was I don't know, I want to say no nonsense version of the bounty hunter that we got from the last episode of Firefly. Because like I feel like they had that same mentality that they know you better than you know yourself, and they're going to use that against you, sort of thing. But like I feel like in the show, like the bounty hunter was joked around. I don't want to say, I mean, he wasn't like, like in your face with jokes, but I feel like the way he presented that was more funny, or it came off more funny to me than it did with the Operative, who basically told you why you screwed up and why he's going to make you pay for it.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look. I mean, because the Jubal Early character from Objects in Space, I love that episode. I love the episode, and I love the character because it's because he's weird. He's weird.
Yeah.
He's a dude that lives in a small ship by himself, and just he's just a weird dude. You think that's right? But the questions that he asks are like they feel like TikTok questions now.
Yeah.
Like when you see
is that her room because she lives in it, or is it her room because her things are in it? You're like,
both.
Yeah, is it still her room if she's not in it? Does that seem right to you?
Deep thoughts.
Yeah,
with the Firefly bounty hunter.
It kind of is, and which does kind of make it fun. He's like, he's always talking about the gun and the simplicity of it, and that's elegant, and it's just an object that has a point. But anyway, but back to the Operative. So obviously the actor, who no one can pronounce his name,
Chiwetel Ejiofor, I believe is how they pronounce his name.
I love it. He's great. This is my first time seeing him on TV in a movie, and I'm really glad that he as an actor didn't get typecast as just the bad guy. Which I think is really good. So his performance is great, and I totally agree with you, Joseph, that I think that the Operative is such a more menacing villain than the 2x2 Hands of Blue, not because there's not a nursery rhyme with him, but also because he seems more terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Because he has reason, and he's clever and smart, and he thinks that he is, for lack of a better word, he feels like he's righteous.
Yeah, that's I was thinking, like you think of like John Wick. They have that that movie, like the first John Wick movie does a great idea of making you like kind of enamored with the myth of John Wick within itself. And at one point they have like the big Russian mob guy says that John Wick is a man of focus and conviction, and that's what the Operative feels like. He is fully in belief that what he's doing is the right thing to be done, even if it is necessarily, like he said, like he has no illusion about his job that it could potentially be seen as evil, but he still thinks it's the right thing to do.
Well, and it's a very important thing to have in a movie for people to understand the motivations of the villains. And we've analyzed this in a couple other films along the way on this podcast, that when you can't truly understand the motivations of your characters, if done poorly, then it can become a very silly premise, right? In the case of the Joker in The Dark Knight, though, you don't really know what motivates him other than just creating madness and creating panic, right? So for us to be able to look at the operative and know that, yeah, it's this conviction, it's this belief, that makes it a very powerful thing, because at least you can understand then, right, what the villain's doing, why he's doing it, and you're not spending the movie questioning that process. It's like, nope, it's locked in. I get it. I know what they're doing. And so it is a very big difference, like you mentioned, with Jubal Early, because Early is really all over the place. And so I think a focus like this is really, really important for this movie, because it elevates the pluckiness of the TV show into a very strong narrative-driven process in the movie. And so you go from less about, let's just talk about going from point A to point B on the TV show, to now we're literally protecting the fabric of the galaxy. I mean, it's a totally different viewpoint going from TV to movie here.
Yeah, I mean, in the TV series, and even in this, like, I mean, it starts off with them just doing another job, seemingly, which is what they were doing in the TV shows, just job to job, trying to make a living, trying to keep the boat in the air. And then they realize that having the Tams on board, they're part of a much, much bigger story and something here. And because of who Mal is, like you said, like, you get these many facets of the character of he's witty, he shoots first, he seemingly is willing to be the bad guy to make sure that his family's fed, but at the same time he will make sure he does the right thing in the end, because that's who he is as a person. So when he figures out like what's happened, he is committed to making sure that the truth gets heard in this movie.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point too here that you know, they once again, they don't spend a ton of time talking about these unification war that was such a big focus for Firefly, right? We get little things kind of sprinkled about that, you know, in the intro to the film, and how they talked about the history of the verse and all that. Like, it's a pretty quick hit. They quickly show it to you. Shawn, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because this is how I viewed the movie after multiple viewings and then consuming the TV media. Does this movie kind of feel like a second unification war after you start to look at, you know, the motivations of Mal and really what they're doing here?
That's interesting. Honestly, I never have thought of it that way, as a second war. I always kind of thought of it as the movie starts off with one trope of it's a heist movie, and then we transition to space version of American Ultra, where we've got this secret agent thing, and then the movie changes again into, we now have the one ring that we have to go destroy. There's other movies. There's probably a better analogy than the Lord of the Rings analogy, that they have to go on the quest in order to. There are other movies where, you know, the people feel like they have to blow the whistle on the government, kind of thing. Not quite Jason Bourne, but there's something similar there. So yeah, I never actually thought of it as a unification war, because even the operative at the end says their regime is just weakened, but it's not gone, and they're not forgiving. So the idea that if there was going to be more, if there was going to be a sequel, it was going to be hard. Like, life was going to be real hard for them.
Oh yeah, I think they'd be on the run constantly, as opposed to just flying under the radar.
Yeah. I think that would have, and then I think that might have been the point, is that because even in this movie, you mentioned earlier, we don't really know from the last episode, Objects in Space, in the movie, how much time has passed, but we do know that things have gotten harder. Because not just the fact that Honora is gone, it's Honora is gone and they haven't talked to her in a while. And Shepherd Book is gone, and we don't really know why. We just know that he's gone. And it's also bad enough that the captain no longer refers to Simon as part of his crew.
Yeah.
Some things have happened. They have had some missions go wrong. I mean, even to the point that Malcolm says, you know, if I dump the payload, you know, I got bits falling off my ship, and a powerful need to eat this sometime this month.
Yeah,
and not to mention, everyone seems to assume Kaylee's running off of batteries. which is just horrible.
Well, yeah. I do kind of feel bad for Jewel State because like it feels like everywhere she goes in life, people like just make her say that line.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And like I feel bad that's the thing that she's associated with, right? Like you have other actors, like people run up to Jack Nicholson and say here's Johnny, right? Or like there's probably other ones that are more like they go up to oh gosh, what's his name? Mandy Patinkin and say the line.
Yes.
Whereas she gets running on a year, I ain't nothing. Twixt my nuthers weren't run on batteries,
Yeah, and then all of the guys in the convention probably all say in unison, "I could stand to hear a little bit more."
I could,
But yeah, just like we've Mark and I have talked about, like if we could have a drinking buddy from the show, who would it be? And mine is instantly Kaylee. Me growing up, having a bunch of car friends in high school, and we spent a lot of our weekends like walking like to a neighbor's house and just helping with whatever automotive job they have. And I feel like Kaylee would be hanging out in that garage with us, just like fixing whatever's there, and she would know more than any of us as to what we were doing. And I'm like, this would be the coolest person in the room for me to hang out with and have a beer with. So like I got like I really associate like this would be someone who I legitimately think I'd be friends with from the crew. And she's kind of reduced to the whole like one kind of like any male mechanic just wants to go in something fast and lay with someone when they're done fixing things.
Yeah. I mean, I think talking about that scene in particular, though, obviously going past the battery operated tools of survival in the universe, that's something that I think the movie did really well that we don't get a ton of, whether it's dialogue or just like specific focus on, is the fact that this crew of people, they have to rely on others to be able to either get the jobs that they have. There's a network of sorts here that are at play. And so we get to see a little bit of that with Fanti and Mingo, the twins that, that Mal believes one is more prettier than the other. And, and then outside of that, though, you've also see some of these other camps that they rely on that the operative unfortunately burns to the ground. So I thought that was a really cool thing that they don't never really explicitly state in the TV show, but they actually show you this network in the movie itself.
Yeah, definitely. And since we're physically here in the space talking about Fanti and Mingo, the bar scene. I mean, what a cool moment when she gets triggered. But before we get to that moment, so watching it this time for the 23rd time, and I was watching it for the purpose of this because I watched it about 5 hours ago. So I was watching it for the purpose of doing this episode. I was looking for some different things. And some of the things that I noticed this time were some more of the subtle things that the actors do to maintain their character. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I noticed this time that actually made me kind of chuckle out loud is when they sit down. It's Jane and Mal and then Fanti and Mingo, and they put the drinks in the little drinking whatever. And when they offer a toast, Jane just drinks. While the three of them have a toast, and it just kind of like reminds you, Jane is just still a blunt instrument.
Yep.
Like he just, this is a drink. I'm going to drink it. I don't care about your words. It just cracked me up this time. I didn't notice it. I've probably noticed it before and didn't cue in on it, but this time I was like, all right, yeah. He's
and you have to wonder if that was an Adam Baldwin, like just like I'm just going to do this, like it's not in the script. I'm in character, and this is what's happening.
Yeah, that sounds pretty right.
It could be a play on Simon Tam calling him a trained ape that's not trained. That's how he behaves in the verse. And to your point, Shawn, in some of the ways that Adam Baldwin is portrayed, Jane in some of these fights, especially within this bar. I mean, when people are like getting kicked and they're like rushing at him, he's just shedding them off, like picking lint off of his shirt, just left and right. And I thought it was really funny you focused on Jane for that, because he is a blunt instrument. And it's like if you watch how he fights too in the series, he doesn't punch people with the front of his hand. He hits them with the bottom of his fist.
Yeah.
I mean, he is as much of a gorilla as he could possibly be. So that Simon Tam line, I mean, it's dead on.
It also probably
Totally.
helps that because he's like 6'2" in real life, and in Hollywood that's like 6'11". You know, you understand? Like, because most people are. I'm not saying everyone is Tom Cruise 5'4" or whatever he is, but I mean most Hollywood is little guys. So whenever you get an Adam Baldwin or a Chris Hemsworth that's like 6'2", 6'3", like they're massive, they're huge compared to the rest of Hollywood. So you're not wrong. He does kind of whack-a-mole that one guy, which you almost kind of feel bad for. He's like, he's getting beat up by this 90-pound girl, and he runs into the brick wall of Adam Baldwin and just has the misfortune of just running into that guy, you know, like anyway, it's just kind of funny.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we actually analyzed this scene a little bit too with the Measuring the Score podcast, because, you know, there's this elegance to River that they display, obviously, the fact that that she, you know, she kind of moves with the grace of ballerina. You know, Joss Whedon always try to play that up when he describes her, and so she kind of does this too in this fight sequence. The music flows with her in a similar fashion. You know, they have you know, matching score here that you know, it just makes a really beautiful scene, despite the fact it's chaotic and there's all this crazy stuff happening in it. But you know, ultimately here, this one scene just vaults us into the second half of the movie, right? Because now we know that River can be, you know, spoken to in ways that we haven't seen at all in the entire rest of the time that we've spent with Firefly / Serenity. So I thought that was kind of a cool scene to see how they break apart the TV screen she's looking at, and that we've got these multiple different layers of messaging that are occurring within it, which brings us to, you know, Mr. Universe, who I like to kind of refer to as the plot saving device of this movie.
Sure.
And it's not to knock, you know, the idea of it, but it's
he
really
kind of needs to
convenient.
be there just to move the story along.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be weird if all of a sudden Wash became a master hacker and is able to discover this information on his own, because we've never seen that. You know, it would have been weird for them, because the way she was triggered, right? It's a code embedded in a commercial for the OT bar, OATEY bar, and which I've seen the entire commercial, which is a trip, by the way. You should YouTube the whole thing. I mean, because Joss basically wanted, you know, like he just said, "Oh, it's Chinese. It's got to be weird." And so, like the animators came up with this thing, and he goes, "Yeah, now amp the weirdness by about a factor of 10." Right. That's why there's like octopus coming out of her bosom. Like it's very weird what little that you get to see. And if you watch the whole thing, it's extremely weird. But yeah, Mr. Universe is the notes that we're sharing, I wrote Radio Ex Machina. We always like to use the Ex Machina trope on our podcast. So whenever we find an opportunity to use it. I don't know if that's really appropriately named for him, because he's not really saving them like an Ex Machina would, but without him they would be lost, so to speak. So I still kind of stand by that thing.
Yeah. And for those of you that haven't taken Latin, which I clearly haven't either, but I've used this term before too. Literally means a god from the machine, right? Like you're basically it's basically the Latin's way of calling it plot armor, or we need this to advance something, right? I mean, and in this case, I mean, I don't want to knock it a whole lot, because I mean, it's not the worst idea to advance this movie, right? That you've got someone.
He's a fun character. Like, he's well played. He's believable, other than the fact that he's there for the plot.
But he comes back, which is the good part, right? It's kind of like not Chekhov's gun, but like it's the thing where like if you're going to show me a gun at the beginning of the movie, then you have to use it in the third act, right? And it's the same thing. They showed us this character with his skill set in the, I guess technically we're in the second act. So
Yeah.
we're going to get to visit him in the third act. And so that's why I think that one, it works, and two, it's not an egregious use of the rule. One of my favorites, specifically of the Ex Machina, there's an author named Neil Gaiman. I think we probably all know who Gaiman is. And he wrote a book which became a movie called Stardust, which I love the movie. I think the book actually isn't very good, personally.
The movie's brilliant. Absolutely.
The movie's brilliant. It really is. And the Sky Pirates are 100% an Ex Machina, to the point that I watched the behind the scenes and Neil Gaiman said, I couldn't figure out how to get them out of this scenario, so I just created Sky Pirates.
It's true.
I just literally needed to get them from this point to this point, and I didn't know how to, so I just invented Sky Pirates. Now in the book, they only have like 3 pages. It's not what they are in the movie. In the movie, it's amazing. I love Robert De Niro as a cross-dressing Shakespeare, Captain Shakespeare. It's brilliant. Anyway.
They're always shaking their hands at each other when they're talking. You know what, Shawn, I love that you brought that up, because honestly, that's an episode I wanted to do for a long time, because you're totally right though. It's their involvement in that movie is totally plot advancing, and if you remove it, we're talking Tommy Wiseau levels of irresponsibility and storytelling here. I mean, there's not a way to get them from that journey from point A to point B. So
plus it also adds, and this is what, tying it back to Mr. Universe, because Mr. Universe isn't just I'm here to deliver information. I have a point. One of the points is to make you kind of smile, and then the other points is to establish this thing that you're going to get to see later. And so, like with specifically with the Sky Pirates, that not only do they rescue them and allow them to forward the plot, but then they have a purpose. Tristan gets trained. He also gets a cool haircut, and then we get what I think is one of the cooler fight scenes when
Mark Strong.
When Mark Strong shows up and his guys are standing there, and the pirates bow and they go through the formalities, but these are pirates. They don't jump them when they're bound. It's so funny and so great. And we get the fight scene while they're playing. I don't want to sing. What's the they can? They're doing the can.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
it's so brilliant. It's just amazing. And then Mark Strong has to bail out because all of his crew is dead, and it's so good. So anyway,
and I once again I didn't want to bring up this David Krumholtz led sequence to necessarily bring the film down from a quality standpoint, and I actually think that using David Krumholtz, who played Mr. Universe, was a good option here, because when we talked about this Ex Machina concept, sometimes you bring in someone who is like your cameo for the movie, right? And if you don't understand what I'm saying here, just think of any movie where Christopher Walken isn't a headliner in the film. He's usually your Ex Machina moment. They're going to bring him in randomly, in the third act or maybe late second act, and the movie advances, right? In this case, I thought it was cool to pick David Krumholtz because, he's obviously a fairly well-known actor. He's recognizable. People know who he is. But his level of star power doesn't distract from everything else going on here. So that's why I think there is a little bit of balance, even though it's technically like plot advancing, and this is the only thing that can really do it. But yeah, for me, I didn't think he took too much from the overarching story. I wasn't sitting there thinking too much about him after they leave his little, part in the movie.
The only thing I've ever really wondered, and maybe the comics address it or whatever, is that the station that they go to, the hangar and the big satellite dishes, I assume that that's his. Yeah. So I've always kind of wondered, like, is the whole planet his, or are there other people there? Like does he run this whole thing? Are there other people there? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like these are the questions that I start asking. Like when they come in the back door or whatever from the hangar and they're stacking up crates, like, who's responsible for those crates? Because it's not him. You know what I'm saying? Like, are there other people there that were killed when the Alliance showed up that we just haven't seen? and like we only ever see his little love chamber / really really incredible video monitor display system, which he for whatever reason has a continuous loop of his wedding video.
Yes.
I mean, saves his life. That and that old what are we forgetting? The old Superman cartoon that's playing while he's there too. Yeah. The Max, he has the Max Fleischer Superman episode playing, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, maybe the love bot is moving the crates because she's probably physically stronger than he is.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an inconsequential thing to think about. These are the things that I think about when I watch.
I'm happy you did bring it up though, because it is an interesting point for this universe, and we can take a moment here because when you look at the TV show, the majority of the settlements that were introduced to were pretty much plopped on these planets, and they were terraformed, and then they said, okay, well, now you get to figure things out. And so I don't know if this is in the comics or not. I don't have the knowledge to answer the question specifically, but I think that it could at least make sense that, you know, maybe this was one of those planets that maybe something crashed onto, or, you know, maybe during the original unification war, you know, maybe there was some fallout from other ships at some point, because I mean, this takes us directly into Reaver territory, right? Like, we know that there is a massive battle at one point here, and the Reavers, you know, occupy all of the remaining ships that that represent this like do not go to zone in the universe. So, not trying to answer it on the job training here, but I mean, if we had to come up with an answer that sounded good for the essay portion of the test, I think we could reasonably make this work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and that's a good segue too, because, you know, this is kind of the part in the movie where we finally get to see that part of Malcolm Reynolds that is tied to a very specific portion of dialogue. And I loved it when Malcolm Reynolds said, you know, you'll see something new, right? Like you'll see something new. And I know I forget the line.
He's like, I think if I go to war, you'll see something new.
That's it.
So to give some context here too, they've rescued Honora, right? They've had to go to the training house. We have the great conversation. She sends them a wave and says, hey, you know, we're having some issues with the locals, which is a plot of a previous episode. Yes. And you need a gun hand. Okay, we're going to come. And then he talks to the crew, trap. And they're like, how do you know it's a trap? Did you see us fight? No, then it's a trap. Mm-hmm. So, well, why are we going to go? If it's a trap, then she's caught up in it. We have to rescue her. And so they go and they rescue her, and they have the fight. And the operative gets to say the cool thing that this is not what it seems. He is not the plucky hero. The Alliance is not some evil empire. Again, thumbing its nose at George Lucas.
And that's not incense.
And that's not incense, which is the most convenient, you know, bomb in the history of conveniences. But I don't care. And but I love this scene. That's one of my favorite scenes of the movie, because it shows that not only is Malcolm a pretty good fighter. I mean, he does get kind of beat up a little bit, but he holds his own okay. But it shows that he's clever. You know, I can speak a word and a missile will be sent to your pulse beacon. He says, well, if you do that, then you better make peace with your dear and fluffy lord, and then throws him the pulse beacon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when they escape, they do the crybaby, not the crybaby, but
they send the probes. Yeah, they send out like 15 of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he said, track. It's a registered transport. You know, track them. He says, oh, we found 7. And he's like, oh, okay. Yeah. He beat me again. Like that's what's so great about their chess game back and forth, is that Mal is kind of a step ahead of him all the time. For as awesome as an operative he is, Mal is kind of a step ahead of him, which makes Mal such a cool character. I guess technically Mal loses, you know, a couple of big pieces when he goes and kills a lot of the people, including Book, which is such a heartbreaking scene.
Oh, really is.
It is.
But that was what would led to the point you were bringing up, was that it leads to Honora saying, you know, Mal, I don't know which version of you I'm dealing with. And he says, if I start fighting a war, I promise you're going to see something new.
Yeah. Yep. And it's chilling though. It's chilling because once again, this is a part of Malcolm Reynolds that we, even in the TV show when he's fighting a war in the Unification war series, he's still laughing. He's enjoying himself. He's almost like a chipper in a way. And this is finally where that switch is flipped.
Yeah.
But something I wanted to mention to you for a moment about that fight between the operative and Mal and Inara's, we'll call it a studio to keep it PG. Something interesting about the operative that I think is a very interesting series of like foreshadowing here. We've talked about how like Jane behaves with like body language and things in the bar. Well, the operative is so dismissive in the way that he fights Inara in this battle with Mal, this hand-to-hand combat. If you watch, he basically sheds Inara left and right. Like he just kind of avoids her. Whether this is one of those feigned respect things or if this is just you're not worth my time to fight, kind of bites him in the ass because the entire idea of well, I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but when they pull the Reavers in to fight the Alliance at the end, it's kind of like the ultimate recognition of, yeah, your righteousness is about to screw you over.
Yeah,
because you keep underestimating the people that you're fighting against, and it costs them dearly in just a few moments in the movie.
Oh, I mean, the operative is extremely arrogant. I mean, Malcolm says in the fist fight, no backup, and he says they'll come if they're called, and he goes, well, you better start whistling, which is a great line. But it's the same thing. So even at the end, when you see Serenity come through the clouds, he even laughs and says he's not even going to change course. And then you get the moment, right, when the cavalry shows up.
Yeah.
And then of course it's this look of panic because once again he has underestimated him.
Yes.
And then ultimately, it's his downfall when he tries to do his little nerve stabby thingy, and it doesn't work because once again, I mean, there's no way he could have known that, but it's the same thing where you can't treat Mal like you would treat any other dude.
Yeah.
Because Mal's different and he's a war vet and he's savvy and he survived for a reason. And
it's a combination of smarts and luck, and that's what gets Mal through.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You're right. I think his superpower would be luck. Because he does have that.
Which I think is also why many of us have wanted to play Nathan Drake for many years, because they both just and thankfully he does in a small little short, which is brilliant. But I digress. We will stick to Nathan Fillion in Firefly and the movie Serenity.
Well, I wouldn't say we've batted around this a little bit, but for those of you who haven't seen Serenity, and maybe this is going to be your first time viewing it after you hear this discussion, we do like to give a little bit of a spoiler alert at times, Shawn, when we know we're getting to something that's pretty poignant in a movie. And that would be the big secret of the Reavers. So for those of you that still want to watch Serenity and you haven't taken the chance just yet, this is probably where you'd want to just walk away for a little bit. Because, I mean, this is the big plot twist that, watching the TV show and consuming the comics, like this is something that I would not say this is something somebody could have called their shot on when they first started the movie. That the Alliance was responsible for the Reavers. And no one knew it, right? So I was always curious to hear other people's thoughts on this, because I thought it was odd that we're talking about space, and when people talk about asteroid fields and not visiting a certain area, I go, well, this is a 360 space. There's no way the Reavers could possibly surround the planet of Miranda in every possible direction. But whatever, either way. What are your thoughts on the verse not going back to Miranda or not trying to explore Miranda again?
You mean like why no one else has tried to go there, or
like why not even accidentally trying to go there? I mean, because
I think it's a pretty known. It seems that the show kind of establishes that it's known that this space here, when they show on the little map there on a 2D map, this is where the Reavers live. So that seems to be like people know that. And I guess another question would you might kind of want to ask is if the Alliance created these Reavers 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and so they've been harassing the Outer Rim for the last 10 years, it does seem kind of strange that the Alliance would just treat it as a cover-up and ignore the problem instead of sending a massive armada to actually just go kill them all. But again, I think the movie is trying to remind us that the Alliance kind of sucks and that they just don't care about, because if the Reavers came close to a central planet, then they would do something.
Sure.
I think it's just to continually to remind us that just like in the Empire and Star Wars, they don't care about the Outer Rim planets. That's why Tatooine sucks, because the Empire doesn't care about them. So
yeah.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same idea. But to your point, and maybe that's why there's so many ships out there. Maybe people do the same thing. Maybe they get caught up in that. And it is interesting that the Reavers are mad enough to eat people alive, but still savvy enough to operate spacecraft.
Yeah, me. that was the thing that I didn't get to. It's like, you know what, they're fun as a concept, but I do not know how they execute that. Like, I'm just lost on it completely, because like when I think space zombies, I think the Borg are like the perfect space zombie. They stick you become a Borg. They add your collective. They're hive mind, so they're not individually intelligent, but there's a smart thing controlling them, sort of thing. So that's why they can do what they do, but it's still like the machinery operates, whereas the Reavers are just pure rage. So they are very much like the space equivalent of like 28 Days Later zombies that just run off pure instinct. And yet, yep, they can fly ships, they can target things accurately and shoot accurately, and they also don't seem to be really mad at each other.
Yeah, they only
Mm-hmm.
want to eat people that are non-Reavers, and I mean, these are very valid points, and I've had these kind of arguments before where it's like, do they have a captain? Is there a captain of each little Reaver ship that is yelling commands in guttural tones to his other mates? Is there enough humanity in there to still do the job that they were like? Maybe these people were ship goers, captains and whatever before on Miranda, and when they went crazy, they just took to the skies because it was default coding in them. Like, they knew how to do it. It's muscle memory, I think, is a better term. But it is, you're not wrong. It is a little weird that they're able to explore, well, not explore space, but they can at least
function through it. And
I mean, the fact that they are rage monsters, the fact that they tried to sneak up on Serenity when they were coming back through,
shows intelligence to it. Patience.
Patience, that they want to run them down for the up close kill as opposed to just a Zerg attack, so to speak.
Oh yeah,
and I like the muscle memory. That's the best explanation I think I've heard about them yet. So for a while there, I was just contemplating that maybe the whole rage thing is just an act, and they're actually really calm and fine when they're operating the ship and no one's looking. And then suddenly a ship shows up on the menu, and it shows up on the blip and meets back on the menu, boys, and they get really excited about it.
Well, here's one thing I want to make as a point about the Reavers, and if I'm going way too serious here, please stop me. But when you think about world languages and how they formed, if you just look at linguistics as in general, most of the reasons for why we have the languages that we do is isolation, right? You have people who speak their own methods and they're cut off from other people, whether it's mountain ranges, whether it's bodies of water, in this case, vast amounts of galaxy, right? So in my mind, when I looked at the Reavers, these are some of the same questions that I had that you guys brought up. But for me, it makes sense that with enough isolation and enough cannibalism, maybe it is possible these guys, or created their own language or created their own methods of understanding. Because when they talk about the packs, right, the injections that the people of Miranda received, they did talk about these heightened levels of violence, but they never talked about heightened levels of cognition, right? In the little video that we get just before the big plot twist, all that happens. So I think it is reasonable to believe that, these guys, the Reavers maybe have a little bit more credit than we're giving them. just because of the fact that, like a good horror movie, we don't see a whole lot of, right? We see a little bit, but there's not like a ton of screen time dedicated to them until the very end of the movie.
While you were talking, I was remembering a thing that I think kind of points at evidence to our thinking, in that they're not just mindless monsters, that they are, in fact, they have a function, they have a cognitive function, just they want to eat people, because it's in Zoe's line from the pilot, she uses the phrase "rape you to death." That's an emotional response to do something like that. That's not basic need. Zombies' basic need is to eat you because they need nourishment, right? That's what we think. We have, obviously it's all fake, so whatever. But
sure,
you know what I'm saying? But like, zombies don't rape you, right? Like, they don't need to use that part of the body in order to get what they need. Whereas in this case, if they're doing that thing, that's what they feel like is a need for them. So I think you're right. I mean, the movie does say it heightened their aggression. So I mean, maybe you're not wrong. Maybe when they're on the ship, they're just kind of normal. They just got all weird and they got cuts on their face, and they go to a mess hall and eat the last bounty that they got of people, and maybe they kidnap people and take them back to the ship, and they have stores of people lying around waiting to be et. And then when it's time to go into fight mode, that's when we see them in fight mode. I mean, maybe that's the thing. We don't know. We never see them in isolation. We only ever see them in attack mode, or when River's cutting them in half with big swords.
Yeah, and the only example of this that we actually have to work with is on the TV show, where we have that one survivor of a Reaver attack, and he does show these different sides of what a Reaver could be. Yeah. It's someone who could appear to be a human at one point, but then be hyper violent in the next. And so once again, that isolation aspect is what happened to this Reaver on the TV show. So I'll say this, Shawn, it was really hard for me to not bring this up on our first episode of this week, because we talked about this same thread on the TV show explanation. Okay. And I'm sitting here like, oh, I really want to talk about this, but I want to save it for the movie. Yeah. That was my plot twist that I was saving all week for this, was the Reaver conversation, because I thought it would come up, and I am very happy that it did. But you know what, wrapping up this movie a little bit here, because we've pretty much covered from, we've covered pretty much everything in the film. And Joe mentioned earlier too about the harpoon going through Hoban Washburn, our favorite pilot, which is the only reason why that happened was because all of the other actors had signed a multi-film deal depending on how this went, and Alan Tudyk was the only person that didn't sign the multi-year deal. That's why he died. Like, that's it.
Yeah, I choose to believe differently. I know there's so I'm super. One of my other favorite shows, actually, right now, my favorite show right now is The West Wing. I love The West Wing, and I've done as big a deep dive as I can possibly do into that without physically reading the scripts. And I do know that characters, there was a character that was killed off in the show simply because she told Aaron Sorkin that she went on an audition for another show. Didn't say she was leaving. She said she had an audition, and he killed her. So I understand that kind of thing happens. I also know that Joss Whedon does like to kill his characters. He does like to incorporate a little bit of chaos. He kills Agent Coulson in Avengers, but then he brings him back. But whatever. But he also he kills Quicksilver and Ultron, and so he's kind of known to do that kind of thing. And I always looked at the Wash death as a way of giving consequence to what they're doing, because what they're doing is hard, and it needs to be hard. And it is kind of frustrating when you see these movies where it's a group of heroes and the worst they ever get out of it is some, bruises and some cuts, because it doesn't feel like there's any stakes to it. It like this having him die just reminds you this is hard. This is gonna be hard. And then when Zoe gets knifed in the back, and Jane takes a bullet, and then Simon takes a bullet, and I think the only one that doesn't get hit in the sequence is Honora.
Yeah.
And that's because she's wearing her Princess Leia bikini outfit.
Yeah. And she's probably killing everything with that crossbow that she learned how to use.
So the reason, okay, I'm glad you brought that. This is such a dumb thing, right? So they filmed that scene kind of earlier on in the production, and they realized we've never seen this weapon before or her ever use it. So later on, they're trying to figure out, how do we establish that this thing is here? Because Mal would never use this, and neither would Jane. So that's why on the phone call, he says, you left something in your shuttle, a case, maybe it's probably just sundries. That's their way of explaining why
that's where the weapon is.
That's where the weapon came from, and that she has a change of clothes.
Yeah.
They had to put that line in. So that is kind of a Foot Locker ex machina. I don't know.
And I'm happy you brought that up, because Joe and I have talked about movies and how there's throwaway lines. I honestly never thought about that until you just connected it. So that's that's crazy. I did not even think about it that way.
I appreciate Joss Whedon because he mentioned on the director's commentary. That's how I even know about it. And the fact that he realized as a director, we've established something later in the movie that we don't have a way to. We haven't connected a path there yet, so we need to create a path. And I think there are a lot of other directors that would just whatever. It's just understood that she has this cool kind of futuristic bow and arrow thingy, because whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, now it makes sense, and now I'll view it with a totally different appreciation the next time I sit down and enjoy it. But I guess in lieu of discussing the entire film at length, one of the things I thought would be a good way to kind of wrap up this conversation is to talk about the legacy of the property, not just the movie, but overall, right? Like we talked about this a little bit in our episode earlier this week about, what this series did for sci-fi, but and I guess in an effort to look for more perspectives on this, Shawn, what do you think about this universe and the impact that it has on sci-fi?
It does have an impact on sci-fi because it's part of our nerd zeitgeist. I don't think it will ever have the outreach that a Star Trek or a Star Wars has, but those are massive properties with many, many episodes and movies and things. And this is 13 episodes in a film and a handful of comics. So, the weight is very different, but I do think that this is felt, and what makes it fun is because we get references to this series and in the movie in other things. Now, the one example I'm thinking of is another Nathan Fillion project, which makes it a little unfair. But in his next TV show that was successful, he did a handful of things that also weren't successful. But he was on the TV show on ABC called Castle.
Yeah.
And Castle was great. I loved Castle, and he would make multiple references to the show. Even as far as having both Zoe on and Adam Baldwin, and I think Alan Tudyk was on. I don't remember.
I'm not sure if Tudyk was on it, but I remember him dressing up as Malcolm Reynolds for one of the Halloween episodes.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And
his daughter looks at him and goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm just practicing my Halloween costume." And she says, "What are you?"
Cowboy again?
He says, "A space cowboy." And she goes, "First of all, there are no cows in space. And second of all, didn't you wear that like 5 years ago?" And he says, "But I like it." And then she says, "Let it go."
Yep.
And so when I was watching it with my wife, I'm rolling, right? Because it's aimed at me. That was for me. And my wife looking at me going, "I know that's from Firefly. I don't get why it's funny, but I know that's what it's from." and
Yeah.
I just loved it. I really did.
Well,
But yeah,
yeah. Well, Fillion is very I guess he's very cerebral with this series and explaining his connections to it. And the actors all are too, in a lot of ways. They're all very thankful for this. They've talked about how this has vaulted them into their careers. Alan Tudyk would go on to have a very prolific voice acting career with like Disney, and they basically call on him now whenever they need a big dynamic voice to come into a film. So Gina Torres also continued to land a lot of solid TV roles. You mentioned Adam Baldwin as well. So one of the things that Fillion pointed out, though, that I thought was really important was that he said that Firefly / Serenity has such a very well, held foothold in sci-fi and just nerddom in general because it never had a chance to suck. That's the exact quote.
yeah.
He said this series has never had a chance to suck. We didn't have, like a rough season 3 or something that you should avoid, right? Like there's none of those issues with it. And so every time I see that interview with Nathan Fillion, it just kind of, it always washes over me in a different way. But ultimately that's it's truth. I mean, this movie, I mean, we pretty much got as strong an effort as you're ever going to get from a sci-fi property. And that's why I think the lasting, endearing, life that this property continues to have even exists. And he's nailing the head with it.
Well, and it does help that the fan base is so. I mean, the brown coats are a thing, right? The brown coats are just as active and involved as the 501st with Star Wars, or
yes,
or with the Trekkies or Trekkers, whatever you want to call us, in Star Trek. They're a loyal fan base, and they're an opening fan base. I will say this, being someone that is a fan of Trek and a fan of Star Wars, I like all sci-fi. There's really nothing that I don't like. I've never got the Star Wars versus Star Trek argument. I think that's kind of dumb because they're not the same thing. Star Wars is closer to Lord of the Rings than it is to Star Trek, but it's, and I will say this, my point was that both Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans are kind of elitist, and that and we were talking before we hit record, being also fans of sports teams. There are some sports franchises, I'm looking at you, Yankees hat, that does have some elitism to it. And there are times when like someone's like, oh, I'm a Yankees fan. You're like, oh, well, I'm a Yankees fan since '74. Like, oh, well, I only started being a fan because of A-Rod. Like, well, then you're not a real Yankee. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's kind of the same thing with Star Trek and Star Wars. Like, oh, I only like Star Wars because of the prequels. And you're like, well, then you're not a real Star Wars fan. Or I only like Star Trek because of Discovery. Well, then you're not a real, but that we don't have that with this. It's like if I said, I like the movie better than the show, but because I watched it first, but I still love the show. They're like, great.
Yep.
If it's the other way, you know what I'm saying? And when it's the other way around, I watched the show first, watched the movie. The movie left me wanting more, left me with a kind of a bad taste in my mouth because the show was so good. You're like, great, let's go watch the show again, So I think that's what's so cool about the brown coat community.
Well, and you brought up a parallel of this at the very beginning of this conversation, that this is a kind of a localized group of fans, right? And it's almost a private club in a way because, like the main characters of the show and the movie are underdogs in a sense, right? So it would make sense that the fans would take on that same style of underdog feel. You've got a little bit more humility, right? The wins are so few and far between that you act like you've been there before, as opposed to, like you said, my Yankees thing, there are people who are so used to winning, they don't appreciate the taste anymore. And so that is also part of this legacy of the verse, is that the fans all kind of take on that same mentality, just like the scrappy crew that we, have grown to watch and love. So, I mean, that's probably my biggest takeaway, is almost like that, the hairs on the back of the neck feeling of just the goodwill that you feel talking to other fans of this series. But hey, you know what? We once again, Shawn, we thank you so much for your time to be here with us to discuss this stuff, because we had such a great time with our other guests this week. We couldn't think of a better way to end this week than with talking about this fantastic film that we got. And so in parting, I always like to give folks just a little bit of a chance at the end here to talk about, what's going on next for their podcast and how to find you.
Yeah, I first wanted to say again, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you both doing this kind of a trilogy. This is a really cool idea, and I'm a little jealous that I haven't thought of it before. And the fact that you got the three of us, the Jesse and Ricky, and then Chris.
Oh, of Ricky D. Yes,
Ricky D from Best Flicks with Ricky D. Yeah, and then Measuring the Score podcast and measuring Chris, measuring the score. He wrote our theme recently.
Yeah,
we just got connected with him, and he wrote our new theme because the last theme I had would literally get us sued. But whoops. It hasn't yet, but there's about 230 episodes out there that might one day get us in trouble. We'll see what happens.
Oh, very cool, man. Well, hey, you know what? My face hurts because I've been smiling a lot for the last, hour and a half that we've been going through this. So, Shawn, seriously, thank you for that experience. It was phenomenal to get your expertise on this. I mean, you've been doing this a lot longer than obviously we have. Joe and I have been talking about movies, for a long time. We just never recorded it. But your perspective's been fantastic. We really appreciate you being on the show and look forward to having you on again.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
It's a shame that we have to say goodbye to Shawn from Cheap Seat Reviews, but we couldn't think of a better way to wrap up the Firefly Verse week than with a comprehensive review of its last live-action entry. As we mention often, please comment, subscribe, and leave a review. Not only does it make Joe feel pretty, but it increases our chances to get noticed across the internet. We'd love to keep making content for you, and this critically helps us to continue.
As we wrap up our episode 3 Midwest Goodbye to Firefly, we hope you've enjoyed this massive undertaking and the friends we chatted with along the way. Once again, a special thanks to Jesse and Ricky D of the Twist My Arm podcast, Chris and Leslie of Measuring the Score, and last, but certainly not least, Shawn from Cheap Seat Reviews. We've quickly discovered a loving family in this independent podcast community. You all have been wonderful guests to work with, and we hope to cross paths again very, very soon. Next week, we dive back into what will feel like a normal week. We're taking a deep look at the 2006 film Idiocracy, a modern classic by Mike Judge that tells a hilarious look at what the future might look like. But is that really something that far away, or are we living it now? Join us with a special guest who will help us break down the movie. And until next time, keep on dissecting.